Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining me on this webinar on a Wednesday evening. Really grateful you could make it. If you can just start by just putting in the chat if you can hear me okay. So just a simple yes would be fine. But if you can just do that so that I know that everyone can hear me all right, that would be great. If your chat is disabled, please also just let me know that too, and I'll try and get that sorted. Feel free to, if you've got any questions or you can't hear me, please let me know. Okay, with that, we will get underway. As I said, just shoot me a message if you're having any trouble hearing me at all. But I'm going to start by just telling you a little bit about why we put this webinar on. We really wanted to give people what we feel are the key steps to understanding how you go about buying your first investment property, or even maybe your second or third. I think whether it is your first or you already have an investment property, you'll hopefully get something out of the presentation this evening. We will have some time for questions at the end, but this really came about because a lot of our customers that we talk to have big dreams about buying an investment property and really love the idea of it, but are just a little unsure as to how to start. So we wanted to give you the keys around what are those steps. And on the back of that, hopefully you'll be really well educated and have a little more knowledge about it so that you can go about understanding if now's the right time for you. And if it is, hopefully you'll want to book in a discovery call with us so we can give you some specifics around your options and where your ceiling might lie with regards to an investment property. So really, when we talk about the steps, the first step we really see as most important when you're buying an investment property is your strategy. So really understanding why is it that you want to purchase an investment property and getting really clear on that. And then how long do you want to hold the property for? We know that property is really a long-term investment, and by that we mean usually holding the asset for at least 10 years, because we've got to understand that the property market will go through cycles which are out of our control, and to be able to benefit most from the increase in price growth, we need to be in the market for as long as possible. And then understanding, are you looking to buy the property for capital growth or for yield? Or another word for that is return. So are you looking to buy this property for cash flow that'll provide, or capital growth, or a combination of both? Because the type of property you will buy will potentially do better in one of those areas. A unit in the city, for example, in Brisbane, is likely to provide very good cash flow in relation to the value, but a house in the fringe areas may provide better capital growth, but not as good a cash flow. So some things to consider there. And if it is going to be negatively geared, and when we talk about negatively geared, we're talking about the property, the cost of holding the property, including the interest payments, are higher than what the income is producing or the income coming in. If those outgoing expenses are higher than what's coming in, then we consider it to be negatively geared, and making sure that you've got cash flow to cover that if you're having to put money in each month. And then what is a realistic time frame to get into the market? And then obviously, can you hold that asset for a long period of time if it is negatively geared? So that's really around your strategy. And then we move to the timing. So it's not so much about trying to time the market. You might have heard this saying, but time in the market. And also when we think about timing, it's really about the right time for you and your family. So you want to have surplus cash flow, particularly if, as I said, if it's negatively geared, and considering now and then trying to look ahead for the next 10 years. And then how does that impact around what you want to do with your personal home loan if you do still have one? Because really with most strategies, the idea would be to try and extinguish that loan as soon as possible. So around timing, we want to consider the sort of things that will impact the property market. So one of the big ones is obviously the interest rate cycle. So as you can see, this chart will show you a little bit around as the cash rate has moved up or down, what the property market has done in response to that. So you can see generally since 2012, we've seen interest rates decrease and we've seen property prices dip, but then increase, dip again, and then have a really big increase on the back as we came out of COVID-19. And then we've seen again, interest rates start to tick up and that growth come right back to a much more normal level. We can see here in sort of 2021, when growth was over 20% in the market, that was an exceptional year and something that's out of character. Normally, you can see a much more probably average growth rate for property sits around somewhere between 5 to 8%. And yeah, but just understanding where the cash rate is in relation to prices and values is really, really important. So we would think that the cash rate currently is at a pretty stable level and we don't see it going up particularly high or coming down on the other side of that either. So we don't expect interest rates to do a lot either way in the near future. And then as well as prices, you need to understand that interest rates will have an impact on borrowing power, and borrowing power has an impact on price growth. So you can see here the reduction, how the reduction in borrowing power works when we see interest rates increasing. Okay, and just some comments that the RBA made to that effect. So, and really importantly, obviously property prices are heavily influenced by many factors, including interest rates. So if we see interest rates go down, we could expect that prices are likely to increase. Consequently, if interest rates go up, it becomes harder for people to afford loans and that could have a negative impact on prices and they could fall away. Okay, so when we're talking about timing, we need to bring it back to your situation as well, that we don't want to just talk about the larger factors that are out there. And when we think about internally what's important, it's understanding where you are with your own home. So if we looked at this situation as an example, we've got in the blue is this couple's existing home valued at $1 million and they have a current home loan on it on $400,000. So the first thing the bank's going to try and do is understand how much equity you have available in your own home to go and purchase an investment property. One thing we really get asked a lot is, oh, look, how much do I need in savings to put towards an investment property? And what I'd say is you really don't need any savings. What you need is a good amount of equity, because it's really, from a tax point of view, the smarter way to go is to actually borrow the full amount for the investment property and use all the savings you have to reduce this loan here in the blue, which is not tax deductible. So you want to try and extinguish that loan first and leave this loan alone until this one's completely paid out. You get no benefit from this loan at all, whereas at least you get some tax advantages coming back on this one if it's negatively geared. So understanding how's the bank going to look at it, they're going to look at a combination of the property values, being $1 million and an investment property for 600,000. So we've got 1.6, and the total lending. So in this case, we're going to go across and have a look and see how we would structure that. So the house for $1 million, the bank's going to allow you to access up to 80% of that. So they're going to allow you to borrow up to 800,000 less what you already owe. So there's about 400,000 of available equity you could access to put down as a deposit on an investment property. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to set up a deposit loan in the orange. So we're going to access of this equity available. We're actually only going to access 135,000 and put that towards the 600,000. Now, the reason that it's in orange is because it's tax deductible. Even though this debt here is secured against the personal home, it is tax deductible. And what it is actually 20% of this value plus stamp duty. So that's how we arrive at the 135. And then the remaining loan is separated on its own, being 80% of the value. So why do we do it that way? And why do we not just link the properties and the loans together? The reason is because if we have it all with one bank, as would be the situation here, then that bank has all your debts and all your properties. And if you ever intended to sell your investment, they could actually use any available funds that are left over to reduce the loan over here. So you don't have a lot of control if you keep it all with one bank. If you've got a lot of equity, it may be a very low risk play and it might be something you consider. But by doing it this way, we would have one lender that we've used here for loan 1 and 2, and we'd use a separate lender for loan 3. So understanding that is really important. And it's really important if you want to build your property portfolio beyond one, because as you go on to property number 3, 4, 5, and 6, you want to be able to access equity for the deposits on those properties. And whilst you're doing that, always paying down this loan in the blue. So that's a little why. I'll just go into a bit more detail around using your existing bank or separating and using different banks. As I said, some of the positives around using one lender is obviously it's convenient. You may get slightly better interest rates, but it's not usually going to be significant. It may save some money in fees. But as I said, there can be pretty serious downside to that, in that one bank holds all the cards, and if you sell one property, they actually have control over to the surplus funds and where they go. So we've talked about structuring, but I'm going to go a little bit further, and when we talk about the repayments. So if you come back here, as I said, we're going to be concentrating on paying down the loan in the blue, but what do we do with the repayments on loans 2 and 3? Do we want to pay those off, or do we want to opt for an interest-only facility where we just pay the interest and we're not actually paying down the loan on the investment property? And it's going to depend on everyone's situation. It's going to be a little bit different, but you can see the difference in repayments. So if you did opt for interest only versus principal interest, you're going to be paying a slightly higher interest rate, but you're going to be obviously paying less each month because you are only paying the interest. And so it works out to about, in this instance, about $540 a month less if you're only paying the interest. If you do go down that road, it's really important to use that saving, that $540 a month difference, towards your personal home loan to try and accelerate that loan in the blue that we talked about earlier, to get it down as quickly as possible. And if you can do that, this actually shows you what sort of time frame you can save by putting that extra $540 a month, $539 a month into your personal home loan. You can see it is taking about 9 years off that mortgage on those numbers we've assumed there. Okay, so that's a little bit around timing. Then we're going to talk about, we have to think about how we're going to actually structure the investment property and what entity do we want to use. So down the first column here, we just looked at here the different options you have with regards to the different entities you use. So you can obviously just do it in your personal names, maybe with your partner, and have the ownership 50-50. You can set up a trust to purchase the property. You could set up a company to purchase the property, or you could keep it in your personal names, but change the ownership structure depending on who has the higher income and who's paying the more in tax. So if we start with just simply a couple who bought it 50-50 in their own names, some of the pros or benefits there are that you will get a capital gains discount if you hold the property for more than 1 year. And what we're talking about there is If you hold a property for 500,000 and in 10 years you sell it for $1 million, assuming no other cost, you've made a profit of 500,000. Because you've held it for more than a year, you will only pay tax on 50% of that profit. So the taxable income or the taxable gain will be 250,000 rather than the 500 because you've held it for a year. So that's available. That capital gains discount is available when you buy it in personal names. It's also available if you buy it in the name of a trust. Important to note, it is not available if you buy it in the name of a company. Okay. Now, some negatives around buying in personal names. There's no asset protection. That's important if you're a business owner and you in the future are potentially sued or face some litigation, that property could be at risk. And also if you're buying 50-50 with your partner and you are on different tax brackets, you potentially haven't got that structured in the most effective way. If one applicant or one borrower is on a really high tax bracket and the property is negatively geared, you probably want most of the ownership to be in their name. So you're claiming more in tax because they have the higher tax bracket. If it's negatively geared, you're going to get more money back. Then we move on to a trust. So some of the benefits around a trust are the capital gains discount we spoke about. You do get some asset protection. If it's in the trust is actually its own entity. So you don't, that does provide some protection if you do have a business. And also with a trust, the income needs to be distributed out of that trust because a trust actually exists for the benefit of the beneficiary. So you have a trust and you have a trustee who is really there to dictate where any profits go. And then you have the beneficiaries. Now with a family trust, that's usually going to be you and your children and maybe some other family members. The trustee can dictate what income goes where, which may provide some good flexibility, again, if people are on different income levels. Some disadvantages with that is that usually you'll be required to personally guarantee the loan. However, you may not be too concerned about given that it's your trust. And there may be a slightly higher deposit required because you're borrowing in the name of a trust as opposed to a personal name, but it's usually not significant. The differences in doing it in a trust as opposed to your personal names are usually not all that significant. There's just some extra paperwork. And obviously you've got the cost of setting up the trust as well, which could be a few $1,000s, and then you've got to be doing tax returns each year. So you need to factor that in. Then you've got a company, which again, like the trust, provides some asset protection, also some flexibility around distribution of income. Sorry, that no asset protection there is that should be down here. It's a typo, but there's no capital gains for a company. So if you do make that big capital gain over a 10-year period, usually the full amount is going to be taxable. And then finally, if you actually do it in personal names, but you split it, you don't have the asset protection, but you've got the capital gains benefit. And you, again, that should be up here, but there's really not too many. Oh, sorry, you do have no asset protection if you still opt for the personal names. Okay, moving on along. Step number 4 is cash flow. That's the other big thing to consider and look at when we're looking at an investment property. And so we've decided to just look at a case study here of John and Susan, who are both 35 years of age with 3 children looking to acquire an investment property to provide passive income for the future. So they're really thinking about income, and this is their situation. So John's on a salary of 175,000, Susan 50,000. They have a current home of $1 million and their mortgage balance of 500. So for this case study, what we've looked at is the purchase of a property in Brisbane in the suburb of McGregor on the south side for 800,000, which is roughly the medium house value in that area. And we've looked at a couple of different scenarios, the average price growth. So over the last 10 years, this suburb in particular has performed at 8.14%, but over the last 15 years, it's closer to 6.5%. The purchasing costs we need to take into account are 35,000, so that's stamp duty and solicitor fees. So that's our total lending amount, which they would likely use, obviously, equity to be able to borrow the full amount. The rental income at 5% of the property value, which is about average, it was actually quite good. Sometimes we see it as low as 3.5% would be that. The interest-only repayments at 6.5%, which is a pretty average rate, be that per week. So you can see the other property costs of holding. So they're actually having to contribute $464 per week just to hold the property. The reason that's as high as it is because they've borrowed the full amount, as you can see, but also the interest rate is higher than the actual return. So they're borrowing money at a higher rate than what the property is returning. And the total outlay per year is that. So you can see that would be a fairly significant amount. But in this case, you know, it would make sense that they would put it mostly in John's name, who has the higher income or the higher tax bracket, or use a trust. A family trust might also work well. So if we took that out over 10 years, how does that actually look? We've done a couple of different scenarios. So we looked at 3.5% capital growth. So pretty conservative, given it, remember it done about 6.6 over the last 15 years. Property value in 10 years' time will have increased from 800,000 to just over $1 million. Our total loan hasn't changed because we've just been paying the interest. Our net equity at that stage is 255. But remember, we've been providing that 464 a week to actually hold the property. So over 10 years, that works out to about 143,000. So our net return after that outlay of holding the property is still 112,000. That's over 10 years. But we're getting leverage. So even though the capital growth is very conservative, because of the leverage, it actually works out to a pretty healthy net return after 10 years. And then you go out to 6.5%. You can see the value obviously is up at around 1.35, net equity 516. Once we take off the holding costs, if we were to sell the property, we'd walk away with a net gain of 373. And then if you did achieve 8.5%, which I think is probably unlikely over the next 10 years, given where interest rates are and the ability for prices to continue to grow at that level, you can see the net return after the outlays is 688. Now, one thing to consider is that you should see consistent growth in rental return. So over the 10 years, the holding costs, which were at about $464 a week, should drop to around $49 a week because that rent should continue to increase at about 5%, we've worked out. And those holding costs should really just stay fairly flat, assuming interest rates don't change too much. So that just gives you a bit of an analysis over 10 years. And the reason these numbers look fairly healthy is, as I said, because of leverage. You're getting 6.5% on an asset that, you know, has gone from 800,000 to 1.3. Very difficult to obviously save that much money during that time. But when you've got an expensive or a very high valued asset growing at a particular growth rate in dollar values, that's going to be quite a lot of money. Moving along, step 5 is research, understanding what sort of property you want to buy and where. So do you want to look at a unit or a townhouse or a house? And do you want a new property or an established? This is something we can give you more detail on the discovery call, but understanding that obviously units and townhouses may have things like body corporate, so they may slightly increase your holding costs, but then those body corporate costs do take care of the property, whereas if you have a house, you're going to potentially have some outlays around maintaining the building and the property itself. And is it worth looking at a new property if there's some depreciation benefits versus established? So once you understand the type of property, then you can start to look at location. Very important to be quite agnostic about location. You're not going to be moving into this property in most instances, so you want to really look for areas that are likely going to be able to provide really strong capital growth or really strong rental return, or hopefully a bit of both. There are some really great tools out there as to try and help you with this selection process. And some of those you can see on the screen being CoreLogic, fairly well-known one used to be referred to as RP Data. Then there's some others, Suburb Finder, and another one that's been recommended to us by some clients is DSR Data. Some of these websites, and they do cost money to join as a subscription, but they give you some really good metrics on how different suburbs are performing and what that likely means for future performance. Or if you wanted to go a step further and seek more professional advice around property selection, you can engage a buyer's agent, and that's where you'll pay a fee to a professional who actually source the property for you. They'll do the research, give them your budget. They'll do the research. They will usually provide you with some guidance on the type of property based on your budget and the location as well. That can be fairly significant. You may be looking anywhere from 1 to 2% of the property price if that buyer's agent is successful in finding you a property. These subscriptions, I think, are more around a couple of $100 per month. So more affordable option if you sort of want to do it yourself. But engaging a buyer's agent, you may feel more comfortable in doing that. So, but to go forward from here, really the next step would be to book in for a discovery call and understand where does your budget sit? What can you borrow from the bank? But also, what does it mean for you around holding the property? Is it going to be positively geared, in other words, providing cash flow for you? Or is it going to be negatively geared where you've got to contribute to the property each month, each week? And what does that mean for your future? Taking into account your family circumstances, if you have children or you want children, is there going to be more cash flow? Is one partner going to be stopping work? All those sort of things need to come into your decision making, which we can go through and have a really great discussion in that discovery meeting. We can also provide some indication if you do have an existing property on what that's likely to be valued at, and actually get a bank valuation, determine the level of equity that you have and understand your borrowing power. So based on your income and your expenses, what can you afford in the property market? So to do that with the discovery call, it's simply a matter of jumping on our website, mynewbridge.com.au, and just clicking book a call, book an appointment, and it will come up with the availability of our 3 brokers. And there's no charge for that meeting, but it is a great discovery meeting in finding out exactly what your options are. So that concludes our webinar this evening. Thank you for jumping on, and I'd like to just open up and give anyone the opportunity to jump on or just put a message in the chat if you like with any questions that you have, and I'd be more than happy to answer them. So you can do that. Should be able to do that via either the chat or the Q&A function. So if you've got any questions, please drop them in the chat. I'd be more than happy to answer them. Or you can shoot me an email or a message. Of course, just book in for that discovery call and find out what your options are. But yeah, so if you've got any questions, by all means, just put them through. Okay, well, it doesn't look like we do have any questions. So I just want to wish everyone a lovely evening. Thank you very much, and I hope you've found the webinar of value. Thank you.